So welcome to a special event tonight, the journey of learning differently, a family interview. We are here with two special guests, mother and daughter, Allie and Jan. Allie, a young adult who has learned much about herself and how to navigate the world with dyslexia, and Jan, who will share the perspective of mentoring and supporting Allie in her journey. Allie and Jan, would you like to introduce yourself and share a brief background about yourself?
Sure. So I'm the mom in this scenario. um, I have also worked at PHP for about 15 years until I retired recently. And that was mostly as a learning disability assistive technology specialist. And I am the parent of Allie as well as her older brother. Not much more to say about me. So Allie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a dietitian. I work at a dialysis center in American Samoa, which is in the South Pacific, and I have dyslexia.
All right, that's great. Allie is extremely adventurous and has carved out a very unique niche for herself. So if you want, you can ask her about that later. So for now, Allie, can you get us started by telling us about what interventions seem to work best for you?
Yeah, so throughout school, my parents were really my biggest support. They helped me in all subjects, reading, math. I really didn't do any schoolwork without their support. And then, of course, in middle school, I had supplemental private tutoring to learn more about reading and writing. And then in high school, I was in a resource specialist class. It's kind of like a study hall, and I got help with teachers there. And it was, again, kind of like a one-on-one tutoring, but in a classroom setting. But one of the best or most helpful things that I think I did in high school was go to a summer program specifically for students with learning disabilities. It was really the first time I was in an environment with other students who have a learning disability, which was really cool because I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. Everyone who was there learns like me, which was really cool, and the teachers were very supportive. They made me feel like I was doing a great job and really boosted my self-esteem and my confidence, something that I didn't necessarily get from my teachers during the school year. So those were all really helpful things. Some things that were not so helpful were I did have an IEP and a 504 plan, but that didn't necessarily mean that my teachers would follow it. And so that was frustrating, or some of my teachers really meant well, but things they would do that they thought were helpful just weren't helpful. So that was also frustrating because they really meant well, but it just wasn't working. Like one of my teachers thought it would be helpful to give me the textbook that was on, it was like a PDF version of a textbook, but I couldn't use it to read to me. So it was just kind of like another version of the same textbook, but it wasn't helpful at all. And then kind of getting extra time on assignments wasn't always helpful. It was a good accommodation and it sounds great, but to me, I always felt like I was behind because once I would finish one assignment, then two others were due. And so I was always kind of falling behind, and that was kind of the same with, taking the SAT, getting double time, but then you're taking a test for 8 hours, and at the end of that, you're really exhausted, and I definitely had zoned out halfway through it. So things like that get a little tricky, but yeah.
All right. That's great. And can you describe a little bit more about the summer program? Is that something that was local here in the Bay Area?
No, so I did the summer program at Landmark College. It's in Vermont. The college, I actually went to that college for my first 2 years of school. And it's specifically for students with learning disabilities. The program it's set up like college. I think it's kind of like a college for kids type thing. I was in high school, and you take different classes and you sign up for what you think is interesting, but the goal is that they're teaching you skills that you can use for the rest of your 2 years at high school, and then also once you transfer to college. And so they kind of taught you a little bit about what assistive technology to use, how to use it, how to write essays, spelling, things like that that are hard for people with dyslexia.
All right, great. And that was Landmark College in Vermont.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for describing that. Yeah, and then let's see. And so you talked about getting the PDF form, and that wasn't helpful, but I just wanted to clarify that that was, several years ago, probably. Yeah. And so now they have advanced the technology and the availability of optical character recognition for digital PDFs. And so lucky for the students nowadays who do receive these digital PDFs, they do have a way of accessing that more easily.
This was actually, Diana, before the assistive technology. So this is going back before that was common. Allie didn't use assistive technology, so that it wasn't that the technology couldn't read it. The teacher thought that the disc would be assistive technology. So it was
a misconception of what yes. AT is.
Yes, I guess.
Right, and there probably still exists a great deal of misconception out there, which is why we still run our assistive technology consideration trainings. So for all the families out there who are looking to understand assistive technology and what it can be, what it should be, and some paperwork, check our e-learning on PHP's website. We do have some videos there. I think Jan is featured at least in a couple of those, and she'll be explaining to you some of the different processes involved with AT consideration and implementation. All right. Okay, so do you want to describe what types of assistive technology did or didn't work for you, Allie? I know that you were kind of late to adopting some of it, but maybe even describe maybe your hesitation for implementing it or using it in the beginning.
Yeah, so I really didn't use assistive technology throughout high school. I heavily relied on my parents. So it wasn't until I was in college that I started using anything really more because I needed to. And kind of my mom knows a lot about assistive technology. So I tried in high school, when I was introduced to it, I tried a lot of different programs. But for me, anything that had too many bells and whistles on it was overwhelming. So I kind of tended to stick with different programs that were simpler, really just used for one thing. For example, I used a text-to-speech program, and a lot of them, they highlight words, they allow you to highlight and note take in the margins. But for me, I just used it to listen to my textbooks being read to me, because I did better looking at the textbook myself and writing notes and highlighting the actual book. So although a lot of text-to-speech programs have a bunch of different things, I chose to just use one of the features. I started using the LiveScribe pen for note-taking, and then the college, the different technologies I used sort of depended on what the college had and what they were giving me to use. So I eventually used Sonocent, which is another type of note-taking program on the computer, and that was really helpful. And that just happened to be something that the college gave me. I still use Grammarly, and my favorite is Google Images. If I don't know how to spell something, I just type it into Google, look at the image. If it looks like what I meant to spell, it's the right word. If not, I know I need to kind of fix it. But I don't know, Google, I feel like knows me because it comes up with words I frequently spell wrong, and it comes up with the correct version. So I think over time, it just knows what you're trying to get at.
That's right, it does now. It's helpful and sometimes a little spooky at the same time, right? But mostly helpful. That's great. Thanks for sharing some of the things that do work for you. And so would you mind sharing, like in the college, we have some inquiries specifically about Landmark College. What specific tools did Landmark College offer you in the AT realm?
I think, well, it's hard. When I was there, they had Kurzweil. I think now they have, or then they moved to Read and Write Gold. So I think as technology becomes newer and changes happen, they're changing what they're providing. But they did provide me with this text-to-speech program. And then they also had, at the time, LiveScribe pens that you could either have your own or you could rent them from one of the resource specialists. So I'm sure now that there's a bunch of different options, they're up to date on newer technologies too. And then in the classroom, the professors are really good at making sure that the students are using the technology. And so that was helpful because as you're learning to use the assistive technology, your professors know how to use it and you're learning how to use it in a classroom. So it makes it a lot easier. So when I transferred, I knew how to use the programs I was using, and I knew how to use it in a way that was helpful for me because I was introduced to it in a classroom, and the teachers were great about kind of helping us figure out what worked.
And Allie, I think you also, that's where you learned to use a graphic organizer. I think they also supplied you with Inspiration, which is a graphic organizer, right?
Is that a planner?
No, the Inspiration, that was the one on the computer.
Oh. Yeah, that was really helpful. The graphic organizer where kind of you put in all your thoughts and they come up in little bubbles. And that's something I still use today when I don't know how to organize something, just writing things out and reorganizing them later, but just getting your thoughts out.
But you can talk about the planner because you're...
Oh yeah, I guess that's assistive technology. I use a planner, and that's kind of one of the things that I still use today, really helpful and important when I was in high school and college, being able to organize what I had to get done and planning ahead, really into color coding and drawing things in, and just, I can't remember anything, so I write everything down in a planner, and just knowing that when a test is coming up or if a paper's due, it's going to take me twice as long as my peers. I can't cram everything at the end, or I can't procrastinate to write a paper. I have to plan it out in advance. So, if it's due at the end of the week, then I would have started it 2 weeks ago. And so I kind of would count backwards in my planner from the due date to make sure that I gave myself enough time to study or finish papers or group projects and things like that.
Yeah, those are great strategies. Sounds like they served you well. But yeah, certainly a planner, even though it doesn't have anything battery operator or not computer based, it's still considered technology. So that term assistive technology sometimes feels like a misnomer when you're using something as simple as like a pencil grip or something to hold up your paper so you have better viewing of things. Assistive technology can be very no tech and low tech even. So don't discount those planners that you might be looking into as technology to write into a school plan. All right. And so you talked about a lot of things that were helpful. that the teachers did. Was there anything that in your interactions with people that wasn't helpful? And how do you advocate for yourself when you find yourself in that situation?
Um, Things that weren't helpful, I think I briefly mentioned this, is like when the teachers weren't following what my accommodations were, so I would get embarrassed in class a lot. One of my accommodations was don't call on me if my hand's not raised, not to have me read aloud in class. I didn't like to have to come up to the whiteboard and write on, like have to write something. And so all those things, they happened a lot. Sometimes teachers would honestly forget and it was an honest mistake. Other times it at least felt like it wasn't a mistake because it happened so frequently. So that was kind of definitely not helpful. In middle school, I got teased a lot for not being able to read or spell. So comments like that were hurtful. And then in high school, when I was in an RSP class, the same kind of thing, students not understanding why I was in a resource specialist class. But I feel like, I mean, this was a while ago. Again, I'm working now, so I've been out of school for a little bit, and it seems like dyslexia is a little bit more mainstream. So I'm hoping that for future generations and kids, it's just kind of more normalized, not a big deal, and that doesn't happen for other students.
Right, right. That's true. There's a lot more awareness around that. Jan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that there's so many, it's almost in vogue now for celebrities and notables to come out and say that they have autism or that they have a learning disability or dyslexia. So there's a lot of potential role models for your children out there. And it's very powerful to know that somebody who's, made a success of something like Virgin Airlines, or, I remember Allie was excited to learn that Keira Knightley had dyslexia and Orlando Bloom. So, those are things that you can, that it's great for your children to know about, because it's, it shows them that these, once you get past school, the options are limitless, and there's a lot of people out there who struggle in the same ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, I saw just the other day on the news that Governor Newsom was, speaking very publicly and spontaneously, and then he went back to his teleprompter, and then he, switched some numbers around. He said, "Oh, there's my dyslexia again," and then he kept going. So, I think it's great to have these role models in public and people who are very comfortable in just owning everything about who they are. So I love that trend. So thanks for sharing that too. Yeah. And so let's see. What specific skills do you feel like you have developed especially well due to having dyslexia?
I'm very organized. I'm good with time management and self-discipline. And that kind of goes back to my planner, kind of planning things out. I was very into kind of schoolwork, and then having a balance between that and life, all the fun things, going out with your friends, going to sporting events, playing sports. And so to me, it was really important to be able to be organized and time management so I could make time for both. And also knowing when, because I have too much school, I have to not go to something or have to kind of rearrange things. But I think those are definitely some of my skills. And also that once you're out of school, at least for me, dyslexia is not anything, I never think about it. I kind of forget that I have it. And it's just not something that comes up in everyday life anymore. And it's not even something that when I started working, I haven't ever disclosed. Or since I've been out of college, I've never disclosed about having a learning disability for any of the jobs, because I have the skill set, I have the knowledge. It's not, my dyslexia doesn't get in the way of work. But when I was in college, I had been working for this one of my bosses for I think maybe 6 months, close to a year, and they wanted me to write a grant proposal. And I was really nervous because that's all the skills I'm really bad at: writing. You have to spell well. You have to be able to organize your thoughts into a nice, clean cut. None of my skills. Really bad at all of them. I was so nervous. So I told him, I was like, I have dyslexia. And he was like, so, and that was the end of our conversation. And he still had me write the grant and then continued to push me for other projects that I never would have thought I could do. And so that really gave me the confidence to kind of go into other jobs, and just knowing that, oh, I can do it. It really doesn't matter. And, if I need help with spelling, somebody else is always better at spelling. So it doesn't matter.
Wow, that's a really fascinating story, because I was almost expecting the other outcomes, like, oh, you have dyslexia, then let me assign it to someone else. But,
Yeah.
The other side of that is, if you do challenge yourself and push forward, even knowing that this is an area where you struggle in, there's so much potential for self-discovery and growth there. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful that it turned out for you.
I think there's one thing Allie wasn't really touching on is that I think she has certain skills because of her dyslexia. Because she was very goal, and some of it's personality, right? I mean, Allie's always been very goal driven, and she's wanted to do well in school, and she's wanted to go to college. But because she had those goals and she had to work harder and longer than anyone else, she really was never afraid of working hard. She really persevered. And like she said, she developed great time management so that she could achieve those goals. So I think that kind of developed because of that. And then some of the innate strengths are which you did mention, Al, is your creativity. It's kind of cliche, but she is really creative, has the ability to approach problems differently, and has an amazing spatial intelligence. Like her sense of direction and the ability to look at something and know immediately how it goes together or to put it together really was always, she was the star in our family for both of those things. It's like she was the go-to person. And I don't know if that particularly is from the way her brain works, but I think it is somewhat related to the neurology of her brain. So I think those are strengths that come from the dyslexia.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Jan. And going back to the college experience, and how do you go about getting the support at a college? I know you went to a specialized college that is renowned for supporting, learners who learn differently, and supporting them, but it doesn't just come to you served up on a platter, right, when you show up at school. So what do you have to do?
Yeah, so Landmark was kind of its own specialty. All the teachers were there. They all offered support. But when I transferred,
Where did you transfer to, Al?
I transferred to NYU, and I did my undergraduate and got my master's degree from there. And so when I transferred to NYU, it was a lot harder to get the support I needed. Although they had an LD center, I really had to work for it. I went to their center. I talked to a specialist. We came up with accommodations I needed. I had way more accommodations than I ever needed. It's just, for me, it was easier to write any possible thing I might need, and then it's there. Nobody can question you about it, so you can use them whenever you want. And I felt like that was really helpful. Giving letters to teachers, at least through NYU, all my teachers would get a letter with my accommodations, just so it was very straightforward at the beginning of the year, again, so nobody could kind of question it. But then really the main thing with preparing for classes and figuring out how things would work with my accommodations was building a good relationship with my professors and going to office hours. It was a great way for professors to understand how I learn, but also realize that I'm working really hard and I understand the material that they're presenting. I might not test well, I don't test well, and that's really where building these relationships were so helpful. I had one professor, I went to office hours every time he held them, and he knew I was working really hard, and on his exams, he let me draw diagrams instead of write paragraphs. And that was really helpful for me. I'm not great at organizing my thoughts and writing, but I'm drawing something out and writing little blurbs about what it means. That was really easy for me to convey. And he, from going to the office hours, from building that relationship, he knew that, and he could tell that on the test I did really well when he let me draw. And so he was kind of evening the playing field for me so he could see my strengths, and it's just a little in a different way than the traditional student. So that was really helped. I think those are kind of the main things, really getting to know your teacher even in high school, and then going to office hours.
Did you, in the college arena, did you feel like you had to, like with friends, did you ever feel like you didn't want to bring it up, or that, you know, how did you manage like your sense of privacy and blending in, or did you feel very open about disclosing your disability to people who you knew?
I in college, I mean, when I transferred, I don't really remember telling. I never told any of my peers that I had dyslexia, or at least like the peers I was in class with. My close friends, they knew. And then, of course, like during an exam, if I had to go pick it up, or if I wasn't there during a test, sometimes people would ask me. But it was pretty kind of normalized. Nobody, like, there were other students in my class who also took exams at the Learning Service Center, so it wasn't really a big deal. And nothing, yeah, I didn't. Some
Okay.
students might choose to, but I didn't.
All right, that's great to hear. Yeah, because sometimes students don't want to utilize the accommodations that are available to them because they don't want to appear differently. What would you say to a youngster like that? Because I think in our audience we have kids from the age of 9 through 17.
Yeah, about not wanting to appear kind of different.
Yeah, in front of their friends and their classmates, they don't want to be the one using anything different than what everybody else is using.
I mean, I think it's really up to whatever your child feels comfortable with. If they feel comfortable using assistive technology in the classroom in front of their peers, then by all means do it. That's amazing. If your child doesn't feel comfortable, I didn't always feel comfortable, especially in middle school and high school. I didn't like being different. And that's okay too. I did a lot of, in high school, when I would take exams, I would just go to my RSP class, and I would just walk out of class, and it was totally normal, and it was something I felt comfortable with. So I think it's really up to your student what they feel comfortable with, and just listening to them and letting them decide what works best for them.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that's part of the assistive technology consideration process, is finding something that does work with the personality of the student. So certainly if families need more ideas, then they can contact us for some brainstorming. And Jan, I have a question for you. In preparing Allie to be college bound, what kind of strategies did you find were effective in getting her prepared, and how did you support her through that long path?
Well, you know, I don't know. I think self-advocacy, building self-advocacy in your student is important, because when they go to college, you're not there to do that for them. And Allie might have mentioned, Allie was very shy and reticent when she was younger and hated attending her IEP meetings. But I used to require her to come in the beginning at least to introduce herself and say hello to the teachers, and if she had anything to share. Staying through the whole meeting was really too hard for her. But, just building this up, doing things like having your child, Allie would dictate a letter to me and things she wanted her teachers to know about her, not just things that helped in the classroom, but she wanted them to know who she was as a rounded person. She wanted them to know what she was good at. She wanted them to know what sports she played. And she would just introduce herself that way. She wasn't comfortable doing it by talking to her teachers, but she was comfortable with the letter. So again, like Allie said, it's starting where the child or your student is at, and modeling. Allie will say, my mom was my advocate all until high school when she wasn't there anymore, and it wasn't that I was trying to be a helicopter parent and do everything for her, but I did respect the fact that she wasn't, that until she was ready to do it herself, I had her back. So I think self-advocacy is important. And of course, some things that you can just try to foster in your child that make a big difference, and that is having goals and the drive to achieve those goals, and that motivation. Because if you don't, because our kids have to work so hard and so long, they have to really want it, because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of work, and it's fatiguing. So, you want to hope and you want to try to really nurture their motivation and their drive to succeed and prepare for college. And then the other thing, like Allie said, is, investigating programs in colleges and having her really prioritize what was important to her in a college. And for Allie, after having gone to Landmark, she really felt that she needed to be in a place that had that kind of support. So she applied to the SALT program at University of Arizona, but she ultimately decided she preferred Landmark to that. And then she did her regular backup schools. But again, she kind of figured out the type of environment that she wanted and really tried to focus on getting into one of those schools. So, really knowing herself, knowing what she needed, knowing what she wanted. So I think having that knowledge. This is a little aside, but one thing I just thought of that I wanted to mention is when Allie was at Landmark, she had a class that was understanding your LD. Remember that one, Al? And Allie said that was the best class she ever had. Do you want to say something about that, Allie, and why?
Sure. I really liked that class because it taught me how to explain having a learning disability to somebody who knows nothing about learning disabilities. And one of our big projects was writing this big paper about ourselves. So I learned a lot about how I learn and what works best for me, and then how to explain to other people my needs. And so it was kind of like a class in learning how to advocate for yourself. And it was a cool class. I enjoyed it.
How did that help you when you went to NYU?
Oh, yeah, that was when I went to NYU, I really had to advocate for myself. There it was an LD service area, but it wasn't great. And it improved from when I was an undergrad through my master's. But along the way, I encountered a lot of problems. Like I would be taking an exam and the computer would crash and then my final would disappear. And so being able to stick up for myself and kind of explaining that to the professors. Of course, I still kind of use my parents to help me, but just being a little better at advocating and speaking to professors.
But also learning how you learn. Knowing how you learned best, did that help you figure out how to study best or how to make the best of your time?
Yeah, I did. I knew how to study for exams. I knew that making flashcards really helped, writing things down. I'm very visual. I'm also really good with music. So if I hear a song on the radio, I'm pretty good at remembering the words the next time I hear it. So that was one of the main ways I would study, is I'd make up a song for whatever subject I was studying, and then just pick a song that I really liked at the time and made up my own lyrics. And so that was really helpful, because then when I get to the exam, I'd write the song down first, and then that was 90% of the exam right there, and I would just be able to look at the song and answer the test. So it did help me figure out how I learned best and how to use that to do well in classes.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Love hearing how creative you were with tapping into your skills. And that's something that all students should remember, is that they have their own unique set of skills, and their dyslexia or learning disability is affecting them in a very unique way, and with their own personality and traits and skills. Figuring out what are their success tools is kind of one of their tasks in life. And it will evolve, and they'll change as they get older and different requirements are pressed on them. So that's a great story. Thank you. Let's see. And what, I guess we have some questions from people. They're asking, how old were you when you were initially diagnosed with dyslexia? And can you tell a little bit about, at the time, whether you did it through the school or did you approach it privately?
You're looking at me. You want me to help you answer that one?
Or
Yeah, I don't know
either
the
of
answer
you.
to that question.
It's for both of you.
Allie was assessed in 3rd grade. Actually, I kind of had an inkling that that something was going on way before that, but I really wasn't getting the support from her teachers or even my husband. Everybody thought I was crazy. But Allie couldn't rhyme in preschool. That was one of my first red flags. But at any rate, by 3rd grade, I finally was able to get an SST meeting. And remember, we're going back into the 90s. Things were a lot different. But at that time, her school felt like her STAR testing and her grades were also good. They didn't feel that she needed to be tested. So I actually went privately and had her assessed. And of course, came back that she had moderate to severe dyslexia. So then I brought that back to the school. And then the school said, well, now we need to assess her, because they didn't want to accept the outside assessment. So they assessed her at that point, and we started out with a 504 plan. We eventually moved on to an IEP because I felt that we needed a little bit more oomph behind it, because we were struggling with some teachers not really understanding or amenable to some of the supports that she needed. So we decided to move on and get an IEP at that point.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then the transitioning from a 504 to an IEP, did you request, when the school did their round of assessments, was that the round of assessments that was used to consider IEP eligibility, or did that come much later?
Actually, they required a second assessment at that point, and since she had already, we already knew she had dyslexia, based on the first assessment, this one was a little more in depth, and so it pinpointed more specific things like auditory processing difficulty, working memory issues that weren't pinpointed initially. You know, Allie, to be honest, Allie was talking about how important it is in college to maintain relationships and have, you know, and frankly, I was on the site council, I was involved in her school, so I was respected at her school, and that really helped us get it moved from a 504 to an IEP.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And so we do have a question here. Says, any tips to get from a 504 to an IEP, and that really depends on, requires a family to put into writing a request for assessment for special education related services, and to put that in writing, submit it to your school district, or your school principal would be okay too, or even to your 504 team if you're currently on a 504, and let them know that you believe your child should be considered for special education, and you're asking for comprehensive assessments to be done, and then that should trigger the timeline for that process. But certainly call us if you're having any issues about that.
And I also see there was a question about how I manage my anxiety, and I think the question popped up when I was talking about the writing the grant proposal. So yeah, I was very anxious. Tips to get through that: I like using stress balls. Like if I'm in a workplace, I like squeezing something, or like a fidget toy. And then I exercise a lot. That's sort of my way to just relax and de-stress at the end of the day. Even going for, like, if I get too stressed out, I would do this a lot when I was in school. I would just kind of stop, go for a 10-15 minute walk, come back and pick something up. Other ways, talking to my mom, talking to my friends, supporting myself, being around people who support me and are proud of me. And I talk to my brother a lot. Just really finding people who you feel comfortable with and really trust. And then really sports or something fun that doesn't make you think about anything that makes you stressed out.
You know, that the sport, again, the fact that, you know, especially when Allie was younger, school was very exhausting. I mean, when she was really young, she'd come home from school and actually fall asleep because it was so exhausting to be paying attention and, you know, all day in school and trying to figure things out. So when she was older, Allie's always been active in sports, and her IEP team at one point wanted her to drop them so that she would have more time to study. And we said no. It's really, I believe that it is really important for kids, no matter what struggles or challenges they have, to have a balance and not to make their life all about their struggles. So for Allie, sports was an outlet for all that energy and that frustration and that exhaustion. And when she was about 8 years old or 10 years old, and she used to ice skate a lot, she told me that the ice was the one place she really felt good about herself. And it was like the way she could, you know, leave school and a hard day and go and release that kind of energy. And so I really do think it's important for kids to nurture their strengths, to find something they're really good at. And it's confidence building, it's esteem building, and it makes their life whole. It can't all be about the challenges. It also has to be about the other things that they're good at, because dyslexia, you know, the way we approached it in our family was dyslexia was just like Allie has. She's the only one in our family with brown eyes and who's left-handed, or dimples, or, you know, all these other things she considered defects when she was little. So dyslexia is just one more characteristic, right? So you don't want to make their whole life about that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jan. And I know you had so many valuable golden nuggets to share with families. What other tips do you think families should know about? So that one about not hyper-focusing on the reading or writing issues and hammering away at that morning through night, right? That's a good tip, because at some point parents is like, but what if we're not spending enough time? Am I being the right kind of parent, right? That's a great tip.
When you're in
other things?
Well, when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to look ahead. You know, when I look back and I think, gosh, I wish I didn't worry so much, you know, or I wish I had not, you know, had so much anxiety around certain things, because honestly, your child will continue to grow. If they can't spell a word now, doesn't mean they're not going to be able to spell later on, or have the supports like Allie's using to get around that issue. But I am always amazed at how much Allie still grows, like her vocabulary. She's an avid reader, things that I never would have expected when she was younger. So I guess what I'm saying is when you're in the middle of it, which many of you are right now, it's really hard to have that perspective, but your child will be okay. Your child will grow, will continue to learn. If they're struggling with reading now, doesn't mean they're not going to be able to read. Or if they're struggling with writing or testing, doesn't mean that they won't be able to do that. But when Allie was younger, I used to worry that she was going to go to college, you know, and here she's got a master's degree and went through a dietetic internship. So you don't have that perspective when you're going in it. So remember, just resist the urge to make everything about the challenges, set limits on homework time, set limits on the struggles. I wish that I had taken her out of school the days they had spelling tests, because her teacher never, ever followed the accommodations in her IEP on spelling days, you know, and I really feel bad that I just didn't do that. But I would say, you know, follow your gut rather than your fears. You know, if your child's having a really bad week, so let them miss a day and do something fun. Let them focus on what they can do. I would try to find role models for your child, mentors, or there used to be a program called Project Eye to Eye. I don't know if it exists anymore, but where high school students who had learning disabilities would mentor through art younger children who had dyslexia as well, or I think any learning disability. But it really, like Allie said, when she went to Landmark that summer, it was so empowering to her. And that's when she came back and said, that's where I want to go to college, because she just felt like she had found her big hug. So having role models, finding other people who share similar challenges can also really be comforting to your child. What else? Oh, I guess one last little, yeah. So remind yourself that your child is going to grow, continue to grow. But I guess my last piece of advice or nugget is that building success in your child starts no matter what age they are. So whether you have a 6-year-old or a 13-year-old, it's really helpful to, again, really build their, you know, kind of help them really develop their self-esteem and their confidence and their belief in themselves, help them learn and understand themselves. Now, again, when Allie was younger, she didn't even want to talk about the D word. And she didn't really want to know what it meant and how it affected her. But yet when she had that class at Landmark, it was really eye-opening, like, oh, now I know how I learn. I'm going to take that with me to NYU. And now, you know, I have to advocate for myself and I know how. So, you know, being aware of their strengths as well as their challenges, building on their self-esteem and motivate, you know, trying to create that inner drive if you can. And then, like Allie said, it's really important that your child has a support network, you know, whether it's, you know, you as parents, their best friend, just having that support network for when they really do feel down and they're getting teased at school or things are happening. And of course, the support like tutoring or that kind of thing. But another one that's important, I think, is having realistic expectations. And having your child, you know, learn to have realistic expectations. So like, you know, if when Allie was younger, she used to, I mean, say, I'm never going to be a writer, you know, or I'm not going to write the American novel, right? Even though she really liked to write stories. She knew that wasn't her strength. And so she kind of focused on something that was, and she was always really good in science and math and kind of leaned towards that. But just having, you know, helping your child have realistic expectations and supporting them. But that doesn't mean underestimating your child either. And I mean, I look back on that too, and I think sometimes I definitely did underestimate Allie's skills, and she would surprise me time and time again. So, you know, this was just our experience. This is just Allie's dyslexia. Every child, your child's going to be different. They're going to have different strengths and different skills, and dyslexia is going to manifest itself differently. And times are different. So it's not going to be the same. And I feel like you guys are really luckier than we were too, because there's the dyslexia guidelines. There's organizations like Understood. There's Bookshare that provides free electronic text. Teachers are becoming more knowledgeable. Parents are becoming more knowledgeable so you can better advocate for your child. There's a lot more, it's out in the open. And the best part as an AT specialist that I really used to like is that all the tools and the things that help the student with dyslexia in your classroom, those tools are really helpful to any student. It's really a universal kind of help. So students who are English language learners or students that just learn differently, maybe they're more visual learners, maybe they take longer to really process material. A lot of the tools that help kids with dyslexia help all students. So it's really easy to think about implementing those things in the classroom as a whole or in your family. But it's so much, and Allie was talking about the assistive technology. Assistive technology has come a long way since she was little. You don't have to spend $1,500. A lot of tools are built in and they're just free and they're part of your devices. There's so much out there that's easy to use, that's free to use, that every student's using, like Grammarly. For Allie, Grammarly is an assistive technology, but that's a mainstream tool everyone uses. So it's easy. You guys are in a good position to make a difference and also to have it hopefully a little easier than people in Allie's generation or the generations before her.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you touched on some of those important resources that families should know about. And so I pulled these up because they were some of the key ones that you mentioned, and they certainly are probably kind of the standout areas that families should look to for reliable information. So understood.org, and look for the fabulous interview of Gavin Newsom by a student. There's a looks like a middle school boy who's interviewing Gavin Newsom, and they're both talking about their dyslexia, and the boy's interviewing our governor. So that was a pretty new video that got uploaded this summer. And then do you want to tell us a little bit more about the dyslexia guidelines, Jan?
Okay, yeah, they've been around. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them by now. They've been around for several years. We were a committee of a variety of different professionals, and these are posted on the Department of Education's website. So this is a resource not just for teachers, but also for parents. And it talks about best practices with regards to everything from assistive technology to reading instruction, to social emotional development. There's just a lot of information here. I'm sure that your children's teachers are familiar with this, but if not, you want to make sure they do know it exists, and you want to familiarize yourself with the best practices so that you have better, can advocate for your child and have better control over what's happening with them. Are they learning to read with a multisensory program? What's the phonics program like? Is it something, when Allie was little, before we knew she had dyslexia, we tried a program called SCORE, which is by Kaplan, and it was a reading program and touted to really increase your students' reading. But because she had dyslexia, it didn't do anything for her because it wasn't being taught in a way that she needed to learn it. So again, are they using programs that are going to be effective with your student? So this is a great resource to know about, to peruse, and to see what best practices are for your child.
Right. And then why should a parent know about International Dyslexia Association of Northern California?
Right. I would encourage everyone to join. There's a Northern California branch. In fact, when I first found out Allie had dyslexia, I was going to every lecture they had. They'd have guests, different lectures, there's other programs, PEN, Parent Education Network, through the Children's Health Council. There's a lot of groups now where you can get support, share ideas, and what you're going through, what your child's going through, and really gain information and knowledge that will help you really serve your child well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the beginning of the month, we had Emma Elizalde, the president of IDA NorCal, as our guest speaker about dyslexia. So that was nice to have her. And look at here, it's our event. And then what about this one, Jan?
You know, anything that you can find, there's so much out there. There's even children's magazines, Dyslexiaville, there's all sorts of things out there. I would say in terms of online information, I think understood.org is probably one of my go-to websites. It's actually a consortium of a lot of organizations. And when Allie was little, it didn't exist. There was something called Charles Schwab Center, and then it kind of morphed into this. But I think that's a great one. If you're going to start with something, I'd start with Understood.
All right. Okay. And then any last thoughts that you have, Allie, that you would like to share? What would you say to a student that you saw who maybe wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia and was really struggling with reading? What kind of information do you think you would share with that young student?
For a young student, it would really be just more about enjoying books, enjoying the stories. It doesn't matter if you can't read it yourself. You can use text to speech. You can have your parents or your siblings read to you. But eventually, when reading's easier, you're going to be able to read the book by yourself. So I think it's really more important just to have the young student enjoy books themselves. And that one day will come and they'll be able to read it themselves. But until then, somebody else can do it, and it's the story that you can enjoy.